Okay, thank you for the introduction, John, very much. Okay, I'm going to be sharing my screen, and I always ask that somebody give a thumbs up or verify. Anybody that make sure you can all see the slides. Okay, thank you so much. So, welcome to Winning Your Job Search Despite Age Bias. And as you heard, well, let's see if this is going to work. I had it all checked. There we go. Back into it so it'll move on. Here's my, concise summary. And I want to point out here how, well, first, I have a number of certifications, but I think my most relevant qualification for you today is my 5 years working with mature job seekers through the Massachusetts Councils on Aging, which has a program specifically targeting to help people age 50 plus. And also, I'm going to point out at the bottom, I have stated I am not a lawyer because I don't want to be accused of the unauthorized practice of law. In this presentation, I'm going to discuss a number of court cases. And what you see on those slides will be factual, as I found online and through, lawyer tools. But also, I add in my opinion in some places. So, I have to say that for our protection. I have an extensive agenda today because Beacon for Life is giving me uh, a bit more time than I usually get for this presentation, half hour to 40 minutes. We're going to try to go through the hour, but I'm going to try to keep you entertained. I do put some humor in, and I'm going to try to keep it interactive for you. And basically, here are the big bullets of the topics we are going to cover. Quite a bit. So, if you're ready to get started, I'm going to start with a question. Is anybody willing to speak up right now and tell me what's your definition of ageism? Can we maybe get one person to go first or raise your hand? And if John spots them, he can give them the go ahead. I see Stephen. Are you raising your hand? Stephen
Sure.
Balzac? Okay, go
Yeah.
ahead. What is it?
I'd I'd say ageism is looking at people and deciding, well, they look old. I don't want to hire them. They're too
Okay,
old for us.
nice and concise. Well, I like that. Now, I found a definition from the World Health Organization, and it's nicely stated and has a lot of info in there. Refers to stereotypes, which they say is how we think, our prejudices, how we feel about them. And then they say discrimination is how we act toward others or even oneself based on age. And when John and I were discussing this topic, one of the things he asked me is, could you put in something about ageism against, another group, the young people? So most of the time we think of ageism as being against I like to say, mature job seeker, a term I picked up working with the MCOA, Massachusetts Councils on Aging. But it can work the other way against the young people. So I've put in a little bit about that too. So why are many hiring managers and companies ageist? I like to think, well, as usual, it comes down to the money. It's expensive to hire anyone, and companies generally view older workers as more expensive hires. They're thinking about more than just the salary. For example, they consider health costs. So, from their perspective, they think, oh, these concerns are valid. They make sense for the company. But I'll assert most of their apprehension is a result of stereotyping. Almost 80% of hiring managers are concerned about the applicant retiring, but how many people in their 50s plan to retire anytime soon? Most mature workers are looking for places to stay, possibly retire from. And if we consider the younger generations, for example, Gen Z, the average tenure at a company is now under 2 years. And 80% of them, according to surveys, decide within 60 days whether to stay or start looking for another organization. Okay. So again, we're asserting that most of these concerns that you see on the slide are unfounded based on the stereotypes. Now, I'm going to give you guys a little task. You can either do this mentally, or if you got pen or paper or access to your phone, you can type something. Here are some characteristics hiring managers attribute to applicants. I just want you to note for yourself, do you assign any of these characteristics to either the mature or the young job seeker? And I'd like you to count them up for each group. So for each one of these, oh yeah, I think greater loyalty, mature workers have that. Or you might think that, oh, younger workers, they're more productive. Add them up in your head or make a little note. Now, you don't have to record the number and keep it, but you might want to consider, well, how many did you choose? Because remember, when you assign attributes, whether positive or negative, to an entire group, that's called stereotyping. Now, in the previous slide, I asked you to note the characteristics you yourself may assign to older or younger workers. Here you can see some of those same attributes. Now, let's see how people generally assign those attributes to older workers. Got a graph here that shows how a younger audience, age 20 to 40, and an older audience, over 40 or 40 plus, how they view older workers. And I'm going to call on another person or anybody. Let's consider how we can use this data. I'd like to hear input from somebody. How could you possibly use this data in your job search? John, if you, I can only see 4 or 5 pictures. If you can cycle through, see if somebody's raised their hand.
Not so far.
Okay, so I'll give you guys a possible answer. Let's say you're having an interview and you may have heard that this company is ageist or this particular person, or they're giving you some cues and you want to try to win them over. Do you think it would make more sense to discuss your loyalty to companies and to your boss? Or would it make more sense to go to your ability to prioritize? So try to find those 2 points on the chart. Greater loyalty is right at the top, and ability to prioritize is about halfway down. Which one, maybe put this in the chat, which one do you think it would make more sense to use in your interview?
Well, one person said ability to, a couple is saying ability to prioritize.
And what I'm going to say to you is the greater loyalty. Now, again, I'm focusing on specifically where are they going to believe you more? Because look at the alignment, how close it is that the younger people and the older people agree. Hey, older workers, greater loyalty. But ability to prioritize, odds are you're going to have a younger person interviewing you, though, again, it is possible that they're going to be 40 plus. So then, yeah, then in that case, it might make sense. But you're going to have to find out, what their priorities are first. And we're going to talk more about that in interviewing as we go through. But especially if it's a younger person, the odds are, according to this survey, they're not going to think the way you do, and you'll be, as they say, spitting into the wind. Now, this is a graphic that one of my clients sent to me last December. This was at the Indeed website, and someone actually approved this. I hope you have spotted the ageist message. I've been told it's since been taken down, disappeared. It's pervasive. It shows up repeatedly and often so subtly many people don't even notice the message. You just take it for granted. So next, I'm going to go through some court cases fairly quickly. I don't want to bore you, but I want you to know the environment today and I want you to see how we got here. So I'm in Massachusetts, and this court case started in Massachusetts and went all the way to the Supreme Court. And basically, there was this guy named Murgia who was a state trooper who didn't want to retire at the mandatory age 55. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court. And basically, the Supreme Court said, well, old age isn't a protected group in need of extraordinary protection. So they said, yeah, you got to retire. And over the years, there are more cases came up. And until recently, the Supreme Court was more bound by the concept of precedent. So cases would say, hey, Murgia, and then they'd add in, something else. So, for example, in Gregory versus Ashcroft, the issue was mandatory retirement for judges. Vance versus Bradley, mandatory retirement at age 60 for U.S. Foreign Service. And they just basically kept saying, no, age is not a protected insular class. The Kimmel case, 2000. They ruled states may discriminate on the basis of age without offending the 14th Amendment if the age classification in question is rationally related to a legitimate state interest. My wife and I actually discussed this, and she said to me, unless we're talking soldiers who need to be in young, fit fighting condition, what possible state interest could be legitimate for discriminating or allowing it against older workers? Something we could discuss later if any of you wish in depth. And finally, notice the final case here, 2009, Kimmel. And the court basically said, so long as the employer can show some factor other than age, then there's no violation of the Age Discrimination in Employment Act of 1967. So right away, because of court cases, wow, you are facing an uphill battle to prove any ageism. So I'm going to ask you guys a question. And I realize you're not lawyers also, but I want you to take a guess. Please type your answers, A, B, C, or D, into the chat. John, you can tell me, because I'm saving room, not showing the chat. You can tell me which letter seems to be popping up the most.
I see an A. I see a D, a B, a D, an A.
Okay. So I think a few of you got it right, because the answer is a month later after that previous case I just showed you, they said, suing people for ages must be the but-for standard, which means that the employee must show the adverse employment action would not have been taken but for the employer's bias, even if the employer were to produce some evidence of age bias in the decision-making process. And I have a feeling most of you will agree with me. This is pretty close to impossible to prove, as the plaintiff must show motive, a mental state. So consider the recent IBM case you may have heard of. The plaintiffs in that case have internal emails and memos clearly demonstrating motive for age discrimination, but IBM has claimed the people who wrote the memos did not speak for the company. Wow. Okay, here's a question. I've already mentioned ADEA, Age Discrimination in Employment Act. I want you to put true or false in the chat. Does it protect job applicants? You can put T or F if you want to save time.
So far, one T and a bunch of Fs.
Woo! And I fooled you all, because from what I can tell, it depends. It's not always true. It's not always false. You go, how can that happen? So I'm going to read you a little bit and tell you about something before I show you the ruling. So there was a guy named Villarreal who applied online for a territory sales manager job at a tobacco company in 2007. He was 49 years old, got no response. He had no way of knowing that the tobacco company had retained a subcontractor to review the applications, supplying guidelines that led reviewers to discard his resume and those of 20,000 other older applicants. The company's internal guidelines stated the ideal candidate would be 2 to 3 years out of college. So they hired about 1,000 people, and about 3 years later, he found out through a whistleblower that fewer than 20 were over the age of 40. So, using that information, he sued and he lost in the 11th Circuit Court. And the Supreme Court, or the SCOTUS, declined to review the ruling, which said, oh, the Age Discrimination in Employment Act protects only existing employees, not job applicants. So if you know anything about the circuit courts and how there are multiple ones in the United States, when a ruling is not overturned, it's still in effect. So if you're in the 11th Circuit, you could possibly run into this issue, making it harder to sue. Now, fortunately, during my research, I phoned the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I stayed on hold for an hour and a half, but somebody actually answered. And they said, yes, our position is the act covers hiring. And I also contacted a law firm in the Boston, Massachusetts area, which said, hey, we're actually filing cases for people, ongoing. So again, it's very interesting, shows you how murky everything can be in this country. But generally it affirms, yeah, it's very difficult to sue for these things. Now, when lawmakers write law, they can't account for every possible scenario. Inevitably, court cases arise and involve points not mentioned in the statute or regulation. So judges study the bill, the law that was finally enacted, listen to the arguments from both sides. If a specific point or topic is omitted, they have to make up their opinion. So, for example, the IDEA explicitly imposes a 20-person requirement for application on private companies, but it doesn't say anything about states or small independent state agencies. Mount Lemon Fire District was a very small independent agency, and I forget which state, but it had under 20 people. So the question is, did IDEA apply? And the good news is that the Supreme Court ruled, hey, there's no such requirement on the states. So they said, hey, it applies to all the states and their political subdivisions. So that's good news for workers. But again, it shows you how specific things can get. Recent case from 2020, just a few years ago, 8-1 ruling. And the question before the court was, does the provision of the Age Discrimination in Employment Act require a plaintiff to prove that age was a but-for cause of the challenged personal action? Remember the previous case I said, you've got to meet the highest standard, the but-for standard. And the court said, no, you don't have to meet the but-for standard. They did note, however, again, two things. Number one, this applies for federal workers and not private industry. And number two, the but-for causation could be important in determining the appropriate remedy. So plaintiffs cannot obtain compensatory damages without showing that age discrimination was a but-for cause of the employment decision, and the remedies will be tailored to the injury. So again, once again, we can see, wow, it can be hard to prove. And in this case, it took a decade to get a Supreme Court ruling. Unfortunately, most of us don't have time, patience, and money to seek this type of justice. Most people simply, move on. So now you've got the court cases. Let's go on to another quiz here. Here's a question from the AARP website. Can they ask you how old you are? Let's hear yes or no's or whys or ends. And John, tell me which way they seem to be going.
Well, we got one yes, another yes, and a bunch of no's.
Okay. Surprisingly, the idea does not explicitly ban employers from asking your age. Instead, it prohibits them from making decisions, hiring, firing, refusing to promote, etc., based on that. Huh? Doesn't that sound crazy? Yeah, I think most of us can agree. Businesses generally shouldn't ask this question, in part, I'll say, because the question could be used as evidence of age discrimination if they really are practicing prejudice. And the EEOC says it closely scrutinizes such questions to ensure that they're being asked for a permissible purpose. AARP, and I'll add myself, believe these questions should be prohibited altogether. If you're going to answer, uh, maybe try to deflect unless you really don't care. How about this? Can they ask, how long do you plan to work? John, what are they putting?
Someone said until I die.
I like that.
Um, you got to mix more no's than yeses.
Okay. Now, AARP says no, they can't. The only thing that matters is whether you can do the job. But I think this question is equivalent to saying we're concerned you're going to retire. One of my own clients had an interview. They were age 48. They said they were stunned when they were asked this. They were only 48, and they're going, what the? So I ran it by a recruiter who gave me this answer. They said until 5 p.m., maybe a little later. I changed the 5 to 6.
So someone asked, can't they ask for date of birth to verify if you're over 18, etc.? So they might not ask for age, but ask for date of birth. Can they do that? I mean, on the application, can they do that even?
Well, as far as I know, again, if we go back to the previous slide, yes, they can ask that because there's any innumerable number of reasons that they could. But they don't even have to ask explicitly. They have so many other ways of finding out. For example, college graduation, they
Mhm.
basically just do a close guesstimate. When do people graduate? Typically when they're 22 to 24.
Right. Well, and Lori pointed out that she thought this is why companies ask about high school graduation to scrutiny.
Yes. Yeah, generally 18 for just about everybody.
Now, Lori Wayaker says that in California, potential employers are not allowed to ask one's age.
Yes, state law can differ. Correct. When I said IDEA, that would be federal law. And I did not explicitly verbally say, yes, state law can differ. So, other than us personally being offended, hurt, financially suffering, does ageism really matter in the big picture? And the answer is yes, because modern societies are aging, birth rates are dropping. And companies can ignore this and continue their ageist practices. There have actually been articles on LinkedIn I've seen where people have made the case that, hey, in the long run, that's not going to be a winning strategy. They're going to be ignoring a growing pool of skilled workers. And remember, what's the alternative to growing old? Probably not as inviting. We all want to keep living. Now, I've been talking about mature audiences for the most part. Let's look at the other end of the spectrum. There was recently a survey of small business owners, which revealed some sharp opinions of Gen Z workers. Now, again, I want to make sure you hear this is small business owners. Yeah, they got some sharp opinions here. To any Gen Z people attending, don't let these survey results discourage you because what they're saying isn't really anything new. Not much has changed in 2,400 years. Yep, Socrates complained about young people in much the same way as a lot of small business owners do today. But think I found a more balanced view about Gen Z, found a lot of good quotes. And I'll say that having worked for several small businesses, I've experienced how many of them expect a lot of work for not so great salary. And because the business is their baby, believe me, they care about their business a lot more than they care about any individual workers. Don't let this Newsweek survey discourage you. There are some good views, and I just think it's basically a little different mindset. This generation has recognized how previous generations were treated, mostly not so rewarded. And different values don't necessarily mean a poor work ethic. I advise people look for jobs that align with your skills at companies that align with your values. Now, mature workers generally think they have the most difficult time landing a job. Studies indicate younger workers, particularly recent high school and college graduates, might have it even worse. Right now, companies really want prime age adults, the people with some experience. So the people at both ends of the spectrum have higher unemployment. And we can likely expect this to continue for a while. Okay, another quiz for you guys. Can they do this? Give me your yes or no, and then John can report what some of you think.
Repeat the question, please.
I saw a job posting that said the company was interested only in people with 7 or fewer years of experience. Can they turn me down just because I've had a long, successful career?
Getting a variety of answers, more on the yes end than on the no. And one person over in the UK says you can't in the UK.
Ah, glad we have an international audience. Thank you for joining us. So AARP says yes, they can turn you down. The posting didn't say anything specific about age. And again, I don't like that answer because remember, a lot of it's implied. So AARP says they can legally turn you down, but I'm sure you agree there's a definite correlation between age and years of experience. Again, just shows how murky this is. So as a result of everything we've discussed with these court cases and even what AARP is reporting, based on laws, ageism is pervasive. This is the big picture. Companies have preferences. Court rulings have made it difficult to prove ageism. High numbers, both for what it's really costing the economy, how it's going to hurt the companies in the long run. Remember, it is an ism, just like racism, sexism. It's the stereotypes, the discrimination, the prejudice that is present in the World Health Organization definition. But I'm not here just to give you all bad news and send you away. I want you to understand what's going on so then I can lead you to some things you can do to increase your odds of overcoming the bias. So here's a work lab survey that shows, well, 50s into the 60s. Hey, work assessment, skills assessment, only 32. Yeah, you can say 32% high, but it's half what the other things are. So the high numbers back up our pervasive argument. But job seekers are, pretty smart. They figured out how job postings often contain ageist language or code words. People have noted how many online applications require the college graduation year or high school graduation, as we just heard a few minutes ago. And that's especially notable when, hey, this type role doesn't even require, a college degree. It's also well known how phone screenings and interviews are often conducted by HR associates who've been told verbally what type people the management's looking for. And I'm pretty sure most of you have heard the term overqualified, which, yes, could be true, especially given tough job market, so we downsize our expectations. But it's generally considered by job seekers to be coding for too old. Whenever I see numbers in the 50s, I say we can choose to be happy. It can be a tough choice, but these figures are definitely nowhere near 100%. You can choose, is the glass half full or half empty? And based upon what I'm seeing recently in the market, people are overcoming ageism because most of my clients are mature. And I deal with a number of recent college graduates too. And I'm helping them to get interviews. So it is possible to overcome initial bias. So there's a question for you. I just mentioned young people. We were talking about them and ageism. Generally speaking, we know ageism against young people, of course, it starts early. But when does it start for the more experienced people? Type your A, B, C, or D in the chat for John to look at.
Mix of B's and C's.
Okay. Well, the 1990s, I was told the studies indicate 30s with a particular number, which we'll call the mode, if you're familiar with that term, of 37. Wow. So it's been around for a while. Now, we saw earlier what their concerns are. How do these concerns express themselves in, again, more stereotyping and excuses? I'm not asking you to answer anything here. I just listed them. These are things that they may talk about internally, their biases. I just want you to think about, anything you may have heard or any excuses. Yeah, when I found this quote online that it showed up in some court case that was quoted, we're looking for someone with more experience, but also someone younger. Yeah. Isms don't make sense. How about the young people? What biases do they have against them? And I'll show you them all at once so you can skim. The first one is obvious. They won't hire you because you have no experience. So how do you get the experience? If you can't get that first job. Then we have the values disagreements that I mentioned earlier. We all run into individuals, whether older or not, who could have one or more of these, I'll say attributes, but I don't think they should be applying them against, entire groups, because again, that's stereotyping. So here's a quiz for you guys. Do you think any of these are true for older workers? You can choose one or more, A and B, A and E, C and G, whatever. Well, if you do G, you probably shouldn't do anything else. So let's see what pops up here.
Everyone's being politically correct and saying G.
Very good. And guess what? According to sociologists and surveys and studies, B is generally true. However, read the part in bold at the bottom. Once you persuade them and say, hey, look, this will really benefit you, generally speaking, they're all in. So again, some values that some people might be a little resistant or individuals, but it's really interesting that you do find, hey, once in a while, a stereotype could be based on fact. Yeah. But there's still that positive part at the bottom. Once you persuade them, they're all in. There are two strategies that I'm now introducing, and this is going to be nothing new to you. You've seen these before. You're going to hear plenty of suggestions for dealing with ageism, but every suggested tactic is associated, as far as I can tell, with one of two strategies. Number one is conceal your age. Show only 15 years on your resume. Leave off your college graduation year. Believe it or not, some people will tell you color your hair. Okay. The second one is grow your skill set. Some of you might recall in the pre-work questions I asked you, are your skills up to date? And I did notice a number of people said somewhat. And I'm telling you right now, that's not good enough. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go forward now. We're going to see how effective these strategies are according to a survey. Now, how about the younger people? Please note some of these make sense for mature workers also. Okay,
Gray
young
their
people. Pardon?
gray their hair.
Oh, hey, I was once told I was turned down for a job because they thought I was something like, well, I was only 22 or 24, and they thought I was like 18 or something. And the manager reported back to the recruiter, he thought his audience would eat you alive. Yeah, but you gotta really work on the skills. This is so more important than ever. I think this is a little more important for the younger audience, particularly Gen Z, because of the real bad stereotypes that they're, not committed or lazy or whatever. You've got to show them. You got to work for a bit. Trust does have to be earned a bit. And be proactive. Don't just do what you're told. Seek out opportunities. For example, seek and offer mentorship. Help out other people. You don't have to be the boss to be a leader. Think about sergeants in the Army or I'll say the armed forces, where even a new young officer will recognize, hey, I'm officially in charge, but I got to find somebody who knows what's going on here. So you can have reverse mentorship even. And one thing that's really important these days is professional, also called personal branding. And I used to despise that term until I met a corporate branding specialist who taught me about his work. And it is so easy to start implementing it for yourself. That's, again, something I can talk further about another time. And another thing to do, stand up for yourself, hopefully professionally and politely. And this stands also for, works with mature people. Challenge ageism. Don't just let it go. You don't have to bring it to the point of saying, I'll go to the Supreme Court, but you could tell people, hey, I don't like that. Or, hey, that's wrong. You're stereotyping people. Stand
Ed,
up for yourself. Yes.
Ed, this is Barbara. One of the things that I tell people, um, if you think the interviewer has something in his or her head and you don't address it, you can't deal with it.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
so what I say is, if you feel that you're being judged for being too old or too young, you put it on the table and say, you know, I have all this experience. You might not say, "Are you?" Is ageism involved here?
Yeah.
You have to be tactful how you do it, but you might say, I have a lot of experience. Is that something that would do you see that as an issue that you might consider that my longevity with your company or whatever? But you put it on the table so you get a response from the interviewer, because then you can combat it. If it's inside somebody's head, you can't do anything about it.
Thank you, Barbara. Love it.
Yeah, asking a question is a good approach. I would also add to the list of tactics, don't focus too much on focus on places where they're known not to have these biases. Don't put so much emphasis on trying to hide an age, because when I walk into the interview and they see that I'm 20 years older than they thought, I've just dug a deep hole for myself.
Yes.
So focus more on your branding, your message, your skills, and finding the places where it's not prevalent. And when you find a place that is, don't waste a lot of time trying to overcome the bias because it's still there.
Thank you. I love that. I used to ask people in one presentation, do you want to work for HubSpot, which proudly proclaimed average age 22 at one point. So let's see what job seekers think of these recommended actions. For example, I'm sure you've all been told, skills-based resumes, that's what they want now. because they are doing skill-based hiring because of they're being flooded with resumes being sent in through AI-oriented websites. So according to surveys, 69%. Okay, somewhat effective. It helps a bit. Omitting your graduation dates. Well, they're going to find out your age at some point, but 61% said it was effective or somewhat. Dropping your older work experience, 64%. And as I argued with a resume writer a year ago, April, this is now standard practice. This is the starting point, I claim, for effective resume writers and jobs coaches. Because if you're not doing any of these things, then, well, again, you're not even being that effective. Now, how about, oh, pardon me, I have to click here. What about growing your skill set? Pursuing additional certifications, completing workshops and training camps. Now, our Boston Globe newspaper reported some months ago the survey results are not great. And I've had a lot of clients through the library and my own who they think one additional certificate will land them the job. I knew, and I still know one, two employment counselors. You may have heard of a national chain called New Horizons. They do technical training programs costing thousands of dollars. And they would get depressed every year around graduation time because they knew the long-term statistics. Yes, some people would get jobs, but they knew an awful lot wouldn't. And a lot of people really thought that, hey, now that I have this certificate, now that I've taken this training program, I'm going to get a job. Yeah. And here's one for Barbara and for George, who's here, and other coaches. Wow, this concerns me. I don't have an answer for this, but I really wonder what my profession can do to raise this figure. And I invite anybody who wants to chat about this at some point. Hey, contact me after this presentation. So now, we're in the home stretch. A few years ago, AARP and the Massachusetts Councils on Aging jointly surveyed employers. And in one section, they asked for the mistakes made by mature job seekers. Number one, not answering the question. As an example beyond the joke graphic, I had a mock interview with a mature client, asked her to tell me about yourself. She proceeded to sell me on her fit for the position without revealing one thing about herself. So I asked her, tell me something at which you need to improve, and she gave me the same sales pitch. Answer the question. They want you to answer the question. Number two, be sure to customize your answer so the answer is relevant to the company and person interviewing you. I've met too many job seekers who have 3 or 4 stories for the entire set of interviews, and they're always telling the same one over and over. And sometimes it relates to some aspect of a problem which isn't relevant to the new role. So please be sure to customize your answers. Next, overselling your skill set. And this is a mistake a lot of the coaches are making. Oh, emphasize your skills. Bring it back to that. But if you overemphasize, then they'll begin to think you're overqualified. And in this market, in the last few years, many mature job seekers have been downsizing, so to speak, their role. I was a director. I managed several departments. I can't get a job. Well, I'll go for a manager role for one department. They might already be concerned that you're overqualified. If you just keep pushing on your skills and experience, you could drive them into thinking, hey, this guy, this woman is definitely overqualified. So watch out for that. And the next mistake is not persuading us you really want the position. Some have compared the hiring process to dating. They want to be sure you're truly interested in them. Not only do they want to know you're the one, they want to know whether they're the one from your perspective. Or are you just using us to fill the gap in your resume? Are you really interested?
Yeah,
I
don't
want
don't
everyone. Oh, go
just
ahead.
back and look bored and yeah, I can do the job. Yeah, I can do that. Yeah. No passion equals probably not that excited about this. Why would I hire them?
Right. Remember, people are found for the skills, but they're hired for fit and likability. Likability keys. Okay, here's one more quiz. Can they ask questions such as these? How long will you stay with us? Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
So far, everyone's saying yes, and I would agree with that.
So these two questions are commonly asked. They are generally considered okay, though some advocates for seniors and mature workers regard them as possibly ageist. If you are ever asked questions such as this, avoid answering with dates, or times, but try to provide an answer that expresses confidence.
I had a friend who he always asked that question, and the answer he liked best from people was, "I see myself in your job."
Now that has a downside though, John.
It can,
Yeah, because there are some managers who they actually become afraid that that could happen.
yeah. But if you put it in the right way, that well, I'm hoping I'm going to help you really succeed. Well, I'm hoping you're going to move
Yeah,
up the
I like that.
organization, and then
Yeah.
I would hope to be considered for your role.
Next, I'm going to pivot back to younger workers, recent college grads. So the following data is not from a survey. I did my own research, asked some recruiters, and I also considered my own experience thinking back to when I was young. So number one, I meet too many college graduates, they don't know what star stories are. I am wondering what's going on in their, career center at the college. You can't answer with, I'm a fast learner. I got an A in Professor Barbara Taylor's course. Her A's are really tough to get. You can't answer things like that. You have to try to state or restate, transform what you've learned into how it will solve people's problems, which goes back to you got to do research. Too many young people, and even mature workers don't do this well enough. They look at the homepage. You have got to dig down. And I alluded to this a moment ago. You transform your coursework into what impact it's going to have.
Mhm.
And finally, they don't really know how to answer questions for problem solving. They may claim, oh, I'm really good at problem solving. I'm good at math, the back to courses. Now, I hope some of you, when you see problem solving here, might recall on the survey I asked you, why do people hire people? And I said, generally speaking, a lot of you I noted answered the usual way I see as a hiring decision. What I wanted to see is whether anybody recognized the following. Everyone is hired as a problem solver. People hire people to solve their problems and make their lives easier so they can get on with other work. That is really important. If you take away one thing today from this presentation, because you can't solve ageism, we can deal with it. But if you take away the problem solving issue that I just mentioned, if you can accept and understand why people hire people to solve their problems, this can literally transform your approach to every application and interview and greatly enhance your chances of being selected for the role. I really believe that.
And I would say that's not just a recent college grad error. I see that all the time. People assume that my experience and my duties are going to speak for themselves instead of digging down into what's the real problem this hiring manager is facing. What's the real problem the unit's facing? What's behind that? Why is it such a problem? How can I show that I understand the deep underlying problem and can solve it? Because that's where the hiring decision is.
Yes. And in addition to the top four, they asked the employers, well, what other mistakes are they making? So originally, I meant this totally for, the mature worker, but I think it applies to everybody. I had a client, Ed, I've got to have Windows 2000 on on my resume. I said, why do you need Windows 2000 Server on your resume? Well, that's where I first learned it. And I told them they don't care. They want to know that you can use the latest versions of Windows Server. Yeah? And don't bring up family and personal history. They may be a friendly interviewer. They may establish a connection with you, but they're not your friend yet. Some people are good at interviewing and digging in and getting information out of you that you don't even realize you're giving. And do not reminisce. According to surveys, younger managers, millennials now, 38 to 42 or so, or a little older, slightly older, they cannot stand boomers reminiscing. And then finally, they said, hey, they didn't look like their LinkedIn headshot. I had people, when I worked for the Massachusetts State Career System, they would have gray hair in the classroom. I looked at their LinkedIn and it's 15, 20-year-old pictures where it looked like they had black shoe polish on their hair. You've got to look like what you look like now.
I know it's not in the survey, but that not discussing old tech skills, I'd add not kind of poo-pooing tech skills. Oh, I don't use that internet social media crap.
Yeah,
Well,
I like that.
I don't care if you use it or not. You have just revealed an attitude towards technology that will make me wonder, are you up to date? Are you keeping up with these things? Kevin has his hand raised.
Hi,
Okay.
thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to add some perspective as an HR professional. I think one thing that's very helpful is to focus in on industries that have a history of valuing experienced employees. So, for example, I worked at a civil engineering firm, an RFP-driven business, and when that RFP wanted a tunneling engineer with 25 years experience, we found those people. And I remember distinctly going up to people in their late 60s, begging them not to retire so that we could use them as part of a project. And we hired young people, all sorts of people in various stages of careers, but professional services firms and other RFP-driven firms where they value experience and expertise, that's where you should be focusing, I think, and that's where I'm focusing on my job search. If it's a 32-year-old media company, 32-year-old person running a media company, chances are I'm not going to be hiring someone who reminds them of their parents. So that's just a tip from my own personal experience I wanted to share with this group.
Thank you, Kevin. That's awesome. Thank you for your work too.
Looks like
Okay, I'm going to get into positive stuff now because we're after one, so I'm going to try to keep moving.
Barbara has a question.
Oh, okay, Barbara.
So there's a term that I really like. It's called being a authentic chameleon. And the reason I'm mentioning that term, authentic chameleon, is the idea that you certainly want your photo to show who you are today, but you also should be looking at your style. Are you wearing glasses that are from the 1980s? Are you dressing in a way that shows that you are current in the way that you're dressing? And believe me, part of me says, hey, this is who I am. I like my glasses this way. I like to wear whatever it is that I'm wearing. But for is there a way for you to still be who you are, but still be more current in the way that you appear? Because I think that that is really important. We tend to make judgments on people within less than 30 seconds about them just by how their appearance is. So I think that that's something to consider.
Thank you. Good stuff. Okay, now we're going to get into some things you can do. So, hey, take your notes or watch the recording. So, I follow the principle work from the inside out. By the way, there's a great book by a colleague of mine in the Newton, Massachusetts area, Tammy Guler Loeb. It's available on Amazon. It was actually one of their best sellers. And I tell people, you got to know yourself. You got to prepare what we call your presidential message. Again, what problems do you solve? What do you want them to know about you? And I meet too many people when I ask them, why should we hire you? And they answer much the same way as a recent college graduate. I got A's. I worked hard. I come up to speed quickly. No, you have got to target the company. You have to know your skills, qualifications, and traits for how they're going to apply on the job and solve the person's problem and make their lives easier. Okay? So, any time, by the way, somebody says to you something like, Mark, John, why should we hire you? You should mentally add, instead of the other candidates. Because odds are you're up against some other pretty good people. And you may think, oh, I haven't got a way to set myself apart. But if you examine yourself, skills, qualifications, traits, and experience, unless you have an identical twin, there's probably not another you out there. And even that identical twin could have gone into a different business. The other thing you need to do is change your orientation. I tell everybody, think of yourself as a tradesperson. In good, warmer weather, my wife and I go out for a walk every day. We have several plumbers in the area. When I see a van in the driveway for the plumber, there is his plumber's van, I jokingly turn to my wife and say, is he unemployed? You've got to have that orientation. You're in between gigs. You are a problem solver, making yourself available to others. And just like a company, start thinking of your brand. What do you stand for? You can start off by using your own letterhead. Whatever the top of your resume is, use it on the top of your cover letter. Whatever font you use it everywhere. Think of your skills and strengths, areas of expertise. That's going to give you key words. And on LinkedIn, you can start using some of those words. You're going to become known for your words, your actions, and thoughts. That's how you start with personal branding. And as part of all this, everybody now has to do so much research. Don't just research the company, research the industry. Who's your competition? Get off the homepage. Find press releases. Is the press release from one company going to affect another one that you might apply to? Ask the question, hey, your competitor recently introduced this new product. How's that going to affect your business? Oh, how does this role help deal with that? And if you're not sure about some things, a great thing to do is go out and get AIR via informational sessions. AIR means AIR, advice, information, referrals. Referrals doesn't have to be for a job. It could simply be, hey, Stephen, who else should I talk to? Okay? You want to get known as someone who's interested in learning more. I was able to get a referral into a group known as the Institute for Career Transitions, where I got a 5-year free, lesson plan, so to speak, from some of the best career counselors in Massachusetts. And then they referred me to other people, which got me where I am. Okay? I already said you apply for roles that match your skills at companies that match your values. And no, It is not stalking to look up people on LinkedIn. They expect it. They want to hear questions such as, let's say, Lisa, I see you've worked here for 4 years. How has the job changed? Or Bryna, I see that you specialize in this and this. How did you get into that particular field? People want to hear your questions. And you've got to do this because competition is fierce. One of my California clients recently said to me, this job market is impossible. But he was getting interviews by the time we finished our sessions. Now, some of my, I say, former clients, colleagues, and friends are here. Please do not answer this following question. I want someone else to answer who has not seen this before. What is this person in the graphic doing? Can anybody tell me?
Gambling, playing slots.
Close. The answer, applying for jobs online.
Really?
Every time you hit that apply button, you just know you're going to be a winner. Alas, your chances of landing a job through the job boards are only around 3%, last I heard. Most people look for jobs online. Most people land jobs through networking. Get off the computer, meet people in person, build some relationships. I was laid off January 2nd, 2013. Within a week, a VP at that company who had left the previous fall because he knew the layoffs were coming, he contacted me and said, apply to the company I'm now at. I'll be your champion. I'll help you get in, but I can't just hire you. You got to interview. Good luck. He was laid off in July. I was laid off in August, second time that year. At my exit interview, the HR rep, who I still keep in touch with, by the way, the HR guy at my exit interview says, sorry, Ed. I said, oh, I understand. It's business. I've been laid off, 4 or 5 times. He says, no, I didn't want to hire you. Whoa, that got my attention. Turned out, he explained to me, the VP, the guy who was my manager, the lead trainer, and the HR guy agreed anyone we hire must be a unanimous 3-0 vote. In my case, the HR guy thought I was too timid. I was much more timid back then, but that's what happened to me at interviews. I quieted down too much. And he thought, hey, they'll eat him alive. 2-1. My champion, though, spoke up and said, I've seen this guy present. I've seen him work. He's totally different once he's in. He'll come up to speed quickly. And the HR guy apologized. He said, I was wrong. You did everything we asked you to. You were great. Sorry, we have to let you go. What would have happened if I had not had that champion? That's what you want to look for. You've heard of the hidden job market. Allegedly, upwards of 80% of jobs don't even get to the job boards. Now, of course, you still have to have an online presence. I have a former client who is in the process of becoming a coach. He offers a program that got him 5 job offers in 3 months. He chose the wrong one. They laid him off within a quarter. He has since gotten another job. And by the way, I'm having dinner this evening with this guy before I go to work at the library. He offers a program. Basically, he says, find your jobs online because that's where the recruiters are. But he says, don't apply online. Reach out to hiring managers and use networking. And that's what he promotes to people. And I got to tell you, the process has worked for him. If any of you are interested in this, contact me. I can put you in touch with this guy in his specific program for direct networking. Now, again, this is an issue for, wow, a lot of Americans. Only 36% have a LinkedIn profile, and it's even less for Gen Z. They're going to Instagram and TikTok. Aren't as many recruiters out there yet. So just got a couple of more slides. And thank you for your patience. I hope it's been worthwhile for you. Because of the pre-work questions, I decided to add this slide. You have 5 general methods for dealing with an illegal question. Again, what was our big talk about today? Ageism. What if you feel hey, I'm being subjected to ageism? Yeah, how old are you? Well, you can choose to answer it. It's not illegal for you to answer. And most interviewers are not trained. Some don't even know the law, or they think they've hit it off with you and are being folksy. So you can answer it if you want to. Next, you can reframe it. Maybe there's an underlying concern. So if asked about how many kids do you have, they might be concerned about your availability or travel requirements. So you could say, I can assure you my personal life will not interfere with my professional responsibilities. Or, I'm fully available to meet the job's requirements, including travel. You could also go back to the qualifications. This keeps things professional. You're trying to avoid calling them out. If asked about marital status, you could say, I'm very committed to my professional growth. Can you tell me more about the company paths at your company? So a little bit different from reframing, in the direction that it goes. Now, some people do say, hey, this is wrong. They question it. You could say, can you please rephrase the question? I don't understand the connection to this role. And maybe they'll understand, oops, I crossed a line, made a mistake here. And then, of course, the opposite of number 1, you don't answer or even try to answer obliquely. You politely decline to answer. You can refuse to answer the question, try changing the subject, even excuse yourself from the interview. Some people have said, I prefer not to answer questions that aren't related to the position, or I'm not comfortable answering that question. Of course, if you do number 5, odds are, unless they realize they really messed up, that you're not going to be chosen. I want to note, or have you remember, most sources emphasize stay calm, be professional, regardless of which of these approaches you take. You might consider documenting the question in the scenario in case you report it to the EEOC. But again, if you go down that road, as you saw with all the court cases, don't expect, swift justice. Okay. So here's the last slide, and then I think we have like 5 to 8 minutes probably for a couple of questions before John does his wrap up. So again, there are some job boards and organizations that specialize in helping, in ageism cases or mature workers. And by the way, if any of you do want to reach out to me, again, my company is called Get Started. There is a dash before the ed, and that is my LinkedIn URL, getstart-ed. My marketing slogan is, it's time you get started. So thank you very much for having me today.
Well, thanks, Ed. It's a lot of good stuff there. And by the way, there are still a couple of you who never identified yourselves in the chats and have a LinkedIn profile name that I can't link to a name. So you will not be identified as attendees. You will not be getting the networking list because I don't know that you've attended. So the ones who I mentioned in the chat, unless you do something, you're not going to get that. So anyway, we have a few minutes for questions, and I am going to be sending, as I said, an evaluation form to everyone shortly after the session, and would appreciate you giving your feedback on the program. Dan, you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to share some items. I mean, this is really good, and I've been a big, complainer of ageism for a number of years now, since in transition for let me see. I'm in my current role for 6 years, so I've been in transition for 6 years. But I'm right. I'm interviewing right now. I'm on. I just finished my third interview with the company. It's my own company, but it's moving into the buy side, into the hedge fund division of my company, which is what I wanted to do. And they all stressed my prior employment. And it could be you looked at 22 years of, I'm too old or, to this, to that. But they looked at it as the asset that they were looking to fulfill. And it wasn't until the third interview I realized that the woman interviewing me is looking for her replacement in the next couple of years. It kind of came out in certain words that she was explaining. And she said, you have the depth we need for this type of a role. In my prior background, I was 22 years in equity trading floor and large Wall Street banks. So, and it really didn't go too much into my current job with the current company, which is the same company. It was more about my broker-dealer experience to bring it in because I saw a lot of commonalities there. So I guess ageism worked in my favor. And ironically, now I got a fourth interview lined up for either this week or next week. They already confirmed that, and it's exciting. I'm like really blown away by this. But at the same time, I'm getting another interview from one of my big clients that I used to work for I don't know, 15 years. Another broker dealer, Fidelity. I'm not going to say who it is. And it's a role that I when I worked at the banks, I was doing, say, commission management for Fidelity. Now this role is for Fidelity's commission management area. So they say it rains, it pours, and I can't believe this is actually happening. But I'm just keeping my prayers going and keeping my fingers crossed that I may not even be on the next webinar for good reason, that is.
Dan, I'd like to let someone else ask a question,
Sure.
but I am going to mention something here. Congratulations for being the internal candidate. Twice in my life, I was the internal candidate. I was told you can't start. We have to advertise it. So remember that. If you're the internal candidate, bless you. You're fortunate.
They didn't mention that. Thank you for sharing that, but they didn't mention that. But I replied for the job. It was an internal job posting within the company. And I've always looked at the investment management, the asset management division instead of the insurance side of it. And I applied July 12th. Oh, January 12th. I'm sorry, January 12th. And they reached out to me literally 2 weeks later. So
Good.
it was advertised, and I don't know if it was on LinkedIn. No, you know what? It was on LinkedIn as well as the internal job post, thinking about it now.
I'd like to give someone else a chance,
Sure,
Dan,
by all
pardon me,
means,
because
by
we're
all means.
running short on time.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. See if anybody else raises their
By,
hand.
by the way, a couple of people are interested in getting that slide with all the URLs. So you'll be getting the networking sheet as well. So maybe you'll want to send that out to people.
Okay.
Ken, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, hi, Ed. Great
Hi, Ken.
presentation. Nice to see you again, too. I guess the one thing I would say, you had mentioned make sure you answer the question in one of your slides. And I think, and then coming around to one of your last slides about reframing the questions, et cetera, I think it's also important to clarify sometimes questions because, the
Ooh,
proverbial aren't you overqualified for this role could mean a number of things. You want my job, get paid too much, going to get bored, whatever. So making sure you know what the question is before you respond to it, I think is also important. But you gave so much great information in there. And again, thank you for that.
hey, everybody, connect with Ken. He's one of the best.
And Eleanor asked a follow-up to Dan's, when is it best to ask about the internal candidate?
Exactly.
Hmm.
My dog's barking here. Hi, Ken. The clarification is good because it also buys you time. If you're trying to pause and think to answer the question, that
Mhm.
playback gives you a little time to get your clarity better. I answer better when I do that, but I do get beat out by the internal candidate. So that is a question that I'm very sensitive of. When is best to find out about that internal? Because you want to say, hey, if you've got the internal guy, please don't have me go through 4 months, two presentations, and fly to California,
Yeah.
which happened to me in the last year, only to find out that they said it was 100% remote. I live in Pennsylvania, and I get there, I get out there, I'm all ready to go. I have an offer letter, but in small print, it said it was remote, but you had to live in California. So there's
Ah,
that problem too. But I'd really want to know, when do you think the best time to address that internal candidate is?
Ooh. No, that's the type question I consider situational. I mean, hey, if you want a free trip, or if you think that
Yeah.
you
I
need
don't
the
need the miles.
practice, or if you're desperate financially, ask, you could let it slide. But my feeling is, because I'm a get it done person, I want to
Hmm.
know sooner rather
Yeah.
than later. Like you say, why waste my time? Why waste your time? In my case, I could say, hey, look, I've been the internal candidate twice. I know it takes a lot to,
Hmm.
push them aside.
Hmm. Thank you.
I mean, even if it's not about internal candidates, I mean, asking a question about, can I ask, what's the process like here? How many other candidates are you looking at? What is it that you are looking at specially from a candidate? I think you could ask some of those questions and explore that.
I do that well, and Ken and Charlie know that I do that part well. But when it comes down with me, I have a nice track record of that internal, because then I go back and find out who did get this role, and I end up linking in with them. We sometimes end up to be very, very good professional friends and associates. But when I hit that, it's like hitting the nail on the head. I know I've hit a right at them, that they know that I know that there is an internal.
I lost out on one job and they called me and basically had said, well, you didn't really interview too great. There was a very, very small company with untrained interviewers, and one of the interviewers and I just didn't hit it off. But I had done my research and I had learned I was being hired for a specific position in the Northeast. The company was in Tennessee. So I just mentioned to them on the phone when they started telling me, basically, oh, you didn't do well for us. Whereas most of the people training me, except one, said, wow, I was good. But I just said, no, I understand you didn't get the contract. And the person on the phone actually went dead silent. And then I heard, you know about that?
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
know, it's like,
Exactly.
I said, it would have been more polite just to tell me instead of insulting me that, that they
Exactly.
were untrained.
Mhm. Thank
Well, I
you.
think it's just about that time. So thanks everyone for coming. Watch for the follow-up emails with the evaluation and then probably over the weekend with the recording link.
Beacon is a national community of senior level business leaders committed to sharing, helping, and learning. To find out more, go to beaconforlife.org.